On my birthday silence. No husband, no family. I called, he laughed. I'm in Lake Como, with your sister. She purred. He's divorcing you and upgrading. I sent a photo. Me in Monaco dressed to kill beside a surprise guest. Their calls flooded in. I smiled, slid into a Rolls-Royce Phantom and drove off without a word. The buzzing of my phone's alarm felt more piercing than usual on this morning, my 34th birthday. I silenced it and stared at the empty space beside me where Matthew should have been. No text messages. No missed calls. No hastily scrawled note on his pillow. Just the hollow echo of promises he'd made last week before leaving for what he claimed was a crucial business meeting in Lake Como. I'll call first thing in the morning on your birthday, Lily, he'd said, kissing my forehead. You know I hate missing it. 7 a.m. came and went. 8. 9. The house filled with the sounds of Andrew and Ella preparing for school, their innocent chatter about making me birthday pancakes stinging worse than Matthew's silence. I forced a smile as they presented their lopsided stack dripping with too much syrup, 8-year-old Andrew beaming with pride while 6-year-old Ella had managed to get more batter on herself than the plate. Mommy, when's Daddy calling? Ella asked, maple syrup creating sticky patterns on her cheeks. Soon, sweetheart. I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. He's probably just busy with his meetings. After dropping them at school, I returned to our empty suburban home. The modest 4-bedroom we'd purchased 3 years ago when Matthew's business finally took off after years of struggle. I walked past the framed family photos lining the hallway, my eyes lingering on our wedding picture. 7 years ago I'd been 27, bright-eyed and full of plans for both my teaching career and our life together. Now I barely recognized that woman. At 11 I finally broke down and called him. The international ringtone pulsed in my ear once, twice, 3 times. I was about to hang up when he answered. Hey, Matthew said, his voice carrying an unfamiliar lightness. Music played in the background, along with the clink of glasses and distant laughter. Not the sounds of a business meeting. It's my birthday, I said simply. There was a pause, then a laugh that didn't quite sound like regret. Right, sorry about that. Lost track of time here. The meetings have been intense. A woman's giggle floated through the connection. Too close to the phone. Too familiar. Sounds intense, I replied, my knuckles whitening around my cell phone. Just having a quick lunch break, he said, his words slightly slurred. Listen, I'll call you back. The woman's voice grew clearer. Matt, who is it? Tell them to call back later. The sound of my sister's voice was unmistakable, even through the haze of my disbelief. My stomach plummeted as if I'd missed a step on a staircase. My sister. Alexandra. The one who'd stood beside me at my wedding, who'd held my hand through both difficult childbirths, who'd supposedly been in Seattle this week for her job. Is that Alex? I asked, my voice unnaturally calm. A brief silence, then Matthew chuckled, as if we were discussing something trivial. Yeah, ran into her here, crazy coincidence. I heard rustling, then my sister's voice came through clearly. Hey sis, happy birthday. Surprise. Her false cheerfulness couldn't mask the slight slur in her words. I was going to call you later. I'm sure, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. More rustling, than Matthew again. Listen, Lil, I gotta go. I'll bring you something nice from Italy, okay? Let me talk to Alex again, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my tone. A pause, then Alexandra's voice, more guarded now. What's up? How long? I asked simply. Don't be ridiculous, she snapped, but her nervous laugh gave her away. I heard Matthew asking what was wrong in the background, his voice distant. Then a muffled exchange I couldn't quite make out. Alexandra came back on the line, her voice dripping with sudden cruelty I'd never heard from her before. If you must know, almost a year. He's divorcing you and upgrading, sis. You really let yourself go after Ella was born. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered against the kitchen tile. I didn't bother picking it up, even as I heard tinny voices calling my name. Instead, I sat at our kitchen island, the one Matthew and I had picked out together during a rare weekend without the kids, and tried to breathe through the vice tightening around my chest. When I finally retrieved my phone, I blocked both their numbers. They could stew in Lake Como, wondering if I was falling apart. I refused to give them the satisfaction of my tears. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I picked up the kids from school with my mask firmly in place, smiling and nodding as they chattered about their day. I baked my own birthday cake while they did homework, my movements mechanical. When Andrew asked about Daddy calling, I told him Matthew's phone was having problems, but he'd call tomorrow. After tucking them in, I retreated to our bedroom closet. At the back, behind winter coats we rarely used in Virginia's mild climate, I found the old storage box I was looking for. Inside lay photo albums from before Matthew, before I'd become Mrs. Chambers, back when I was just Lily Morrison with dreams of her own. The first album showed me in my college graduation gown, my teaching certificate held proudly in hand. My parents flanked me, their faces beaming with pride for their first-generation college graduate. I'd been so determined then, securing my first teaching position at Westbrook Elementary before I'd even had my diploma in hand. I flipped through more pages. Photos with my college roommates on weekend hiking trips, volunteer work at literacy programs, my first classroom decorated with painfully earnest motivational posters. My fingers traced the face of a young woman who believed her future was limitless. Then came pictures of Matthew and me during our whirlwind romance. Our first date at a cafe near the school where I taught 3rd grade. Weekend trips to nearby beaches. The small but perfect diamond ring he'd presented after just 6 months together. I remembered how supportive he'd seemed of my career at first. Then came his job losses, 3 in rapid succession. The gentle suggestions that perhaps I could take a year off to support him emotionally while he found his footing. The pregnancy with Andrew that made the decision easier. The promise that it would be temporary. But temporary had stretched into permanent. Matthew's struggling business eventually took off in year 4 of our marriage, around the time Ella was born. By then my teaching certificate had lapsed, and the woman in these photographs had disappeared into grocery lists, pediatrician appointments, and being the perfect corporate wife at Matthew's business dinners. I closed the album and leaned back against the closet wall, surrounded by the detritus of a life I'd willingly put on hold for a man who was at this very moment laughing in Lake Como with my sister. The betrayal cut deep, but something else was stirring beneath the pain. A flicker of the determination that young woman in the photographs once possessed. Tomorrow I decided I would start making calls. But tonight I allowed myself to mourn, not just for my marriage but for the years I'd lost sight of myself. Sleep evaded me that night. By 5 in the morning I abandoned the pretense, slipped on my robe and padded downstairs with a determination I hadn't felt in years. If Matthew wanted a divorce, I needed to understand exactly what I'd be fighting for, or against. His home office had always been off limits, an unspoken rule established early in our marriage. Business papers are boring and confidential, he'd say whenever I ventured too close. Nothing you need to worry your pretty head about. The condescension had always bothered me, but I'd swallowed it along with so many other small indignities. Not today. The door opened silently and I flicked on his desk lamp, casting a soft glow across the meticulously organized space. Unlike the rest of our home where evidence of family life abounded, this room contained no photos of the children or me. Just degrees, awards, and a single picture of Matthew shaking hands with the mayor at a Chamber of Commerce event. I started with the filing cabinet, methodically working through folders labeled with client names and project numbers. Most contained contracts and correspondence I only partially understood, but in the drawer marked pending, I found a thick folder for something called Project Apex. The proposal outlined a massive commercial development in Northern Virginia, easily 5 times larger than anything Matthew's company had managed before. My breath caught when I turned to the final page and saw the potential client's name, Ryan Callaway, CO, Callaway Development Corp. Ryan Callaway. The name hit me like a physical blow. Ryan from Westlake High. Ryan who'd taught me to drive stick shift in his father's old pickup. Ryan who'd taken me to senior prom when my original date came down with mono. Ryan who'd stayed in touch through college before life and distance gradually pulled us apart. I hadn't thought of him in years, but seeing his name now felt like a lifeline being thrown while I was drowning. I checked the date on the proposal. It was scheduled for final review next week. According to Matthew's calendar, which I found open on his laptop, he would be meeting Ryan's team in New York on Tuesday to finalize the details. Lake Como had never been a business trip. Just a romantic getaway with my sister while closing in on the biggest deal of his career. Dawn was breaking as I made coffee and settled at the kitchen table with my laptop. A quick search confirmed that Ryan had indeed done well for himself, building a reputation for sustainable commercial developments with community focus. His company bio mentioned his Virginia roots and commitment to revitalizing smaller communities with thoughtful growth. Values Matthew had always dismissed as unprofitable idealism when discussing competitors. I hesitated with my finger over the Contact Us button on the Callaway development website. What exactly was I hoping to accomplish? Warn an old friend about my husband's character? Beg for information? The desperation of my situation suddenly hit me full force and tears threatened again. Then I noticed something in the project description that didn't add up. The proposal in Matthew's office included several innovative community integration concepts that I'd never heard him discuss. In fact, they sounded nothing like his usual profit-first approach. I dug deeper into the Callaway development site and found similar language in Ryan's previous projects. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone and dialed the direct number listed on the proposal. Callaway. His voice was deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably Ryan's. It's Lily, I said, surprised at how small my voice sounded. Lily Morrison. Well, Chambers now, but... Lily. The shock in his voice was evident, followed quickly by warmth. This is unexpected. How are you? It's been 9 years? Almost 10, I said, memories flooding back of our last meeting. A quick coffee when he was passing through town just before I met Matthew. I'm sorry to call out of the blue like this. Don't apologize. It's good to hear from you. He paused. Is everything okay? You sound. Not really, I admitted. Ryan, this is going to sound strange, but do you know Matthew Chambers? He owns Chamberworks Development. The silence on the other end stretched uncomfortably long. Yes, we're considering a proposal from his company. His voice had cooled slightly. Lily, are you calling about business? Because that would be. He's my husband, I interrupted. And he's currently in Lake Como with my sister, telling me it's a business trip while planning to divorce me. Another long pause. I'm sorry, Ryan finally said, his voice gentler. That's awful. But I'm not sure how I can help. The proposal he sent you, I said, flipping through the pages in front of me. These community integration concepts. The sustainable materials sourcing plan. The local artist installations. Did he present these as his ideas? He did, Ryan replied slowly. Are you saying they're not? They're nothing like anything he's ever built or talked about, I explained. Matthew thinks public spaces in commercial developments are wasted revenue opportunities. His exact words at our last neighborhood association meeting. Interesting, Ryan said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. Because those elements were exactly what put his proposal ahead of others. We have a meeting next Tuesday to finalize. I took a deep breath. I think he's copied these ideas from somewhere else, possibly from your own previous projects. It wouldn't be the first time he's taken credit for other people's work. The silence that followed was different, calculating rather than shocked. Lily, I think we should continue this conversation in person, Ryan finally said. Can you meet me tomorrow? I'm actually in Falls Church for a site visit. There's a cafe called Roasted on Main Street. I have kids, I said automatically, the reflexive response of a mother who's forgotten how to prioritize herself. Bring them, he said simply. I'd like to meet them. And Lily? Bring that proposal if you can. I think we have a lot to discuss. As I hung up, I noticed my hands had stopped shaking. For the first time since that devastating phone call yesterday, I felt something beyond pain and shock. It was a rusty, unfamiliar feeling that took me a moment to identify. It was the stirring of purpose. And perhaps, just maybe, the first inkling of justice. Sleep came easier that night, purpose replacing the hollow ache of betrayal. I woke before my alarm, mind already racing with the day ahead. After getting the kids off to school, I drove straight to the bank where Matthew and I held our joint accounts. I'd like to review all our accounts and safe deposit box access, I told the personal banker, a woman named Janet who'd helped us set everything up years ago. Her eyes flickered with recognition, not of me but of the situation. Of course, Mrs. Chambers. Is Mr. Chambers joining us today? No, I said firmly. But as a joint account holder, I have every right to this information. An hour later, I left with a complete picture of our finances, including copies of recent statements, wire transfers, and access logs. What I found confirmed my suspicions. Matthew had been gradually moving money to a separate account for months, small amounts that wouldn't trigger my attention. Not enough to empty our savings, but enough to establish a comfortable cushion for himself. My next stop was to a divorce attorney recommended by Janet in a whispered conversation as I was leaving. She helped my sister when her husband did something similar, she'd said, slipping me a business card. Patricia Miller's office was modest but professional, her handshake firm and her eyes kind but shrewd. "Tell me everything," she said after I'd settled into the chair across from her desk. I did, from the birthday phone call to the discovered business documents to the separate bank accounts. "Classic pre-divorce behavior," she confirmed, making notes. "And the business? Your name isn't on any of it." "No. He always insisted it was better for tax purposes." She nodded. "But you've been supporting him throughout its development? Taking care of the home, children, entertaining clients, allowing him to focus entirely on building the company." "For 7 years," I confirmed. "Then you're entitled to a portion of its value regardless of whose name is on the paperwork. Virginia recognizes contributions of a homemaking spouse." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "What's your ideal outcome here, Lily?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on what I was losing that I hadn't considered what I wanted to gain. "Stability for my children," I said automatically. "Financial security. And..." I hesitated, then added, "recognition for what I've sacrificed." Patricia smiled for the first time. "Good. Now let's talk strategy." By the time I left her office, I had a clear plan for the legal aspects. Don't confront Matthew yet. Document everything. Secure copies of all important papers. Establish independent accounts. But the business angle, that required a different approach altogether. I met Ryan at Roasted as planned, Andrew and Ella in tow with their backpacks full of activities. They sat at a nearby table with hot chocolates and cookies while Ryan and I talked at a discreet distance. "I've looked deeper into the proposal," Ryan said after warm greetings and catching up. "These aren't just similar concepts to our previous projects. They're direct copies, down to some of the wording." I slid across the additional documents I'd taken from Matthew's office. "There's more. These are preliminary sketches for the innovative community spaces he's proposing." Ryan examined them, frowning. "These are almost identical to the riverfront commons we completed in Pittsburgh last year. We had those published in Urban Development Quarterly." "Which Matthew subscribes to," I confirmed. "Along with every major publication in the industry." Ryan set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Lily, this is intellectual property theft. If we'd signed this deal..." "I know." I met his eyes steadily. "And I'm guessing this isn't the first time he's done it." Ryan pulled out his tablet and quickly searched something. "The Westbrook Center his company completed last year." I thought it looked familiar. "It's remarkably similar to a Henderson design project from Chicago." We looked at each other, the implications clear. My husband wasn't just an unfaithful spouse. He was a fraud whose business success was built on stolen ideas. "I need to cancel this deal," Ryan said. "But more importantly, we need to document this pattern." "We?" I asked, surprised by his investment in the situation. I've always wondered what happened to the Lily Morrison I knew, the one who was going to change education for underprivileged kids one classroom at a time. His smile was gentle but searching. "I'm seeing glimpses of her again." I glanced at my children, happily drawing at their table. "She got lost somewhere between diaper changes and being the perfect corporate wife." "Well, I'm glad she's finding her way back." He hesitated, then continued. "Our European headquarters is in Monaco. I need to fly there next week for quarterly meetings. The timing might work in our favor." "How so?" "Matthew expects to sign this deal Tuesday. When he discovers it's cancelled, he'll be desperate to salvage it. Desperate enough to follow if I suggest relocating the meeting." I caught his meaning immediately. "To Monaco." "Exactly. Away from his comfort zone. Away from his support network." Ryan leaned forward. "And if his wife and children happen to be there too?" "He'd panic," I finished, the pieces falling into place. "Especially if he thinks I know everything." Over the next hour, a plan took shape between us. Not just a confrontation, but a carefully orchestrated series of moves designed to protect my interests and expose Matthew's deceptions. That evening, after tucking the children into bed, I stood before my bathroom mirror, studying my reflection. Somewhere in the past 7 years I'd stopped seeing myself. Really seeing the woman behind the roles of mother and wife. My wardrobe had shifted to what Matthew preferred, my hairstyle chosen for low maintenance rather than how it framed my face. On impulse, I grabbed scissors and cut the long layers Matthew had always insisted made me look more feminine. The shoulder-length bob that emerged felt like a declaration of independence. The next day I took half of our accessible savings and opened my own account. I contacted our family doctor and arranged for both children's medical records to be copied. I had copies made of birth certificates, social security cards, and passports. Each action was a stitch in the safety net I was weaving for our future. Ryan called daily, updating me on the business side of our strategy. He'd formally canceled the deal with Matthew's company, citing irreconcilable differences in business philosophy. "He's called me 6 times, Ryan reported. I finally took his call and suggested we might reconsider if he met me in Monaco next week to discuss a revised approach. And he booked his flight immediately. First class." Ryan's voice held grim satisfaction. "He's desperate to salvage this. I made our own travel arrangements, not first class but comfortable enough for the children's first international flight." As I packed our suitcases, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This wasn't just an escape or a confrontation. It was reclaiming the life that had been slowly disappearing beneath the weight of Matthew's expectations and deceptions. "Are we really going to Europe, Mom?" Andrew asked excitedly as I tucked his favorite books into his carry-on. "Yes, sweetheart. And it's going to be the beginning of something new for all of us." The flight to Nice was a blur of in-flight movies, Andrew's endless questions about Europe, and Ella falling asleep against my shoulder. We landed early in the morning, the Mediterranean sunlight painting everything in shades of gold that seemed almost dreamlike after the emotional darkness of the past week. "Is that the ocean?" Ella asked, pressing her face against the taxi window as we traveled from Nice to Monaco. "It's the Mediterranean Sea," I explained, feeling a flutter of excitement despite everything. I'd never been to Europe. Matthew had always traveled internationally for business alone, claiming it wasn't practical to bring family along. Our hotel overlooked the harbor, modest by Monaco standards but still nicer than anywhere I'd stayed in years. Ryan had booked connecting rooms for us, with a small balcony where the children immediately rushed to count the yachts bobbing in the distance. "They're adjusting well," Ryan observed, joining me at the railing while the kids debated whether a particularly large vessel qualified as a super yacht. "Kids are resilient," I said, though my stomach churned with doubt. "I've told them we're helping with Daddy's business trip and having a special adventure. The truth will come soon enough." Ryan's company headquarters occupied 2 floors of a sleek building near Monte Carlo. He'd arranged for the hotel's childcare service to watch Andrew and Ella while we attended to business, promising them an afternoon exploring Monaco's oceanographic museum afterward. "Are you ready for this?" Ryan asked as we entered the modern lobby with its panoramic views of the city and sea beyond. I smoothed down the navy blue dress I'd purchased specifically for this confrontation, professional enough for a business setting, elegant enough to make a statement. As ready as I'll ever be. We timed it perfectly. Matthew was scheduled to arrive at 2 p.m. for what he believed was a meeting to salvage the deal. At 1:30, we gathered in the conference room with Ryan's legal team and chief financial officer, who had been briefed on the situation. "We have clear evidence of intellectual property infringement," the company's legal counsel confirmed, reviewing the documents I'd provided. "Multiple instances across several projects." Ryan nodded grimly. "Enough to justify immediate termination of negotiations and potentially pursue damages." The corporate language felt strange in my mouth, but I pushed through. "I'd like to be present when you inform him," I said. "But not immediately visible." Ryan understood. We arranged the seating so I would be partially obscured by a support column when Matthew first entered. His assistant showed us the security feed from the lobby on her tablet. Matthew had arrived early, pacing nervously near the reception desk. "Showtime," Ryan murmured. I watched Matthew enter the conference room, his confident stride faltering slightly when he saw the assembled executives. He hadn't expected a full meeting. He'd been hoping for a private conversation where his charm could work its magic. "Matthew," Ryan greeted him coolly. "Please have a seat." "Ryan, good to see you in person," Matthew said, reaching for a handshake that Ryan didn't reciprocate. The rebuff was subtle but unmistakable. Matthew's smile tightened as he took the offered seat. I appreciate you reconsidering our proposal. That's not why you're here, Ryan replied, sliding a folder across the table. These are direct comparisons between your proposal and existing projects. Some ours, some from other firms, showing unmistakable plagiarism of design concepts, community integration strategies, even specific wording. Matthew's face drained of color. There must be some mistake. No mistake, I said, finally shifting into his line of sight. I found all the source materials in your office, Matthew. The magazines, the downloaded PDFs, even your notes on how to adapt them. The shock on his face was almost worth everything I'd been through. Lily, what the hell are you doing here? Supporting my friend's business interests, I replied calmly. Just as I've supported yours all these years. Matthew's eyes darted between Ryan and me, calculation replacing shock. I don't know what she's told you, but my wife has been emotionally unstable lately. Save it, Ryan interrupted. We've verified everything independently. The deal is permanently cancelled and we're evaluating our legal options regarding your unauthorized use of our intellectual property. Matthew's lawyer mask slipped completely. You can't do this. This deal is worth millions to my company. I've already started preliminary work. Based on stolen ideas, I interjected. Just like you've stolen years of my life under false pretenses. The meeting concluded quickly after that. Ryan's legal team presented Matthew with formal termination papers for the deal, along with a cease and desist regarding any use of Callaway development concepts. Matthew signed with a shaking hand, his eyes repeatedly flicking to me with a mixture of rage and disbelief. As the executives filed out, leaving just the three of us, Matthew turned on me. Is this what it's about? Punishing me because I want a divorce? Destroying my business because I fell for someone else? Hi, sister, I corrected icily. And no, this isn't punishment. It's consequences. For your business practices and your personal ones. Ryan stood. I think we're done here. As Matthew gathered his papers with jerky movements, I made my move. Just one thing before you go, I said, pulling out my phone. Let's commemorate this moment. Ryan understood immediately, moving to stand beside me against the floor-to-ceiling window with its stunning view of Monaco's harbor. I positioned myself carefully, confident but not smug, elegant but not trying too hard. The woman I'd glimpsed in those old photographs finally returned. Marina, Ryan called to his assistant who was returning with some paperwork. Would you mind taking a photo of us? She snapped several as Matthew watched, confusion and anger warring on his face. I reviewed the images, selecting the perfect one. Ryan and I looking professional and at ease, the magnificent Monaco backdrop unmistakable, both of us with subtle smiles of victory. Matthew stormed out as I pressed send, attaching the photo to a message that read simply, "Thought you should know where I am. The children send their love." We collected Andrew and Ella from the hotel childcare and spent the afternoon as promised at the Oceanographic Museum, my phone buzzing constantly in my purse. 6 missed calls from Matthew. 4 from my sister. Dozens of increasingly frantic text messages. Are you going to answer those? Ryan asked as we watched the children press their faces against the glass of a tropical fish exhibit. Not yet, I replied, experiencing a strange new feeling that took me a moment to identify. Power. Not the vindictive kind, but the steady assurance of someone who had finally taken control of her own story. As the sun began to set, painting the Mediterranean in fiery orange and deep purples, Ryan drove us along the coastal road in his company car. A tasteful BMW, not flashy but undeniably elegant. What happens now? He asked as the children dozed in the back seat, exhausted from their day of adventures. I silenced my still vibrating phone without checking it. Now we go home and face reality, but on my terms, not his. The road curved along the coastline, each turn revealing another breathtaking view. For the first time in years, I felt the same sense of possibility stretching before me, beautiful, unknown, and finally mine to navigate. The flight home from Monaco felt different from any journey I'd taken before. Not an ending but a beginning. We landed in Virginia on a crisp autumn morning, the familiar landscape of our hometown appearing both unchanged and entirely new through my transformed perspective. My phone had over 50 missed calls by then. I'd answered only one, from Patricia Miller, my divorce attorney, who was already preparing for the storm that would inevitably follow. When we pulled into our driveway, I wasn't surprised to see Matthew's car already there, his silhouette pacing behind the living room curtains. "Wait in the car with the children," I told Ryan, who had insisted on driving us from the airport. "If things get heated, I'll call you." Matthew flung open the front door before I reached the porch steps. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, then caught himself as neighbors across the street paused their gardening to watch. He lowered his voice to a hiss. "You took our children to another country without permission. Do you have any idea the legal trouble you're in?" "All the documentation is in order," I replied calmly, brushing past him into our home. "And unlike your trip to Lake Como with my sister, mine was actually about business." His face contorted with rage. "I've spoken to my lawyer. Taking the children internationally without my consent." "Oh, I had your consent," I interrupted, pulling out my phone and showing him a text message he'd sent months ago. *, fine with me if you want to take a trip with the kids this year. Just let me know when. *, not very specific but legally sufficient. Patricia confirmed it. The first hearing came 3 weeks later. Matthew had hired Brandon Ellis, a notorious divorce attorney known for aggressive tactics. I sat beside Patricia at one table, Matthew and Brandon at the other. A chasm of polished wood between us that felt as vast as an ocean. "Your Honor," Brandon began, "Mrs. Chambers absconded with the children to Monaco without proper notification to their father, demonstrating emotional instability and poor judgment." Patricia calmly presented my documented communication attempts during the trip, the children's maintained school assignments, and most damaging to Matthew's case, the recording of his Lake Como call where he'd laughed about being with my sister. "It appears Mr. Chambers was not concerned about his children's whereabouts while enjoying Italy with his sister-in-law," Patricia noted dryly. The judge's expression spoke volumes. Matthew's attacks grew more desperate as the proceedings continued. He claimed I was financially irresponsible, despite my meticulous household accounting. He suggested I was emotionally unstable, contradicted by evaluations from the court-appointed family counselor who praised my steady support of the children through the separation. Most painfully, he tried to leverage Andrew and Ella. "Daddy says we might have to move away from you sometimes," Andrew confided one evening, his small face crumpled with worry. "He says the judge might make us." I gathered both children into my arms. "Your dad is scared right now, and sometimes scared people say things they shouldn't. But here's what I promise. I will always be your mom, and no judge will ever change that." While the legal battle dragged on, I began tentatively reconnecting with friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Coffee with Jennifer, my former teaching colleague. Lunch with Mark and Diane, our neighbors whom Matthew had deemed not our kind of people after his business took off. "We missed you," Jennifer said simply. "The real you." "I missed me too," I admitted. "I'm still trying to figure out who that is again." The most difficult reunion was with my parents. They'd been wary of Matthew from the beginning, their concerns driving a wedge between us when I interpreted their hesitation as lack of support for my choices. "We should have tried harder to stay connected," my mother said, tears in her eyes as she hugged me in their familiar kitchen. "Instead of just watching you disappear." "I wouldn't have listened," I acknowledged. "I had to find my own way back." My father, never a man of many words, simply said, "You're stronger than you know, Lily. Always have been." 6 months after Monaco, we reached the final divorce settlement. Matthew's business had suffered from the cancelled Callaway deal and whispers about his methods that had spread through the industry. He'd grown weary of fighting a battle he was increasingly likely to lose, especially after evidence of his financial maneuvering came to light. The terms were better than I'd dared hope. Primary custody of Andrew and Ella, the family home, half of our joint assets, and a significant portion of the business valuation, recognizing my years of supporting its growth from behind the scenes. "It's more than fair," Patricia assured me as I signed the final papers. "It's just." Matthew refused to meet my eyes at the last hearing, his sister conspicuously absent from his side after their relationship had publicly imploded. As we left the courthouse, he finally spoke directly to me. "I didn't think you had it in you," he said, something like reluctant respect in his voice. "That was always your biggest mistake," I replied simply. 1 week after the divorce was finalized, I sat at our kitchen table. My kitchen table now, surrounded by college brochures and online program printouts. Andrew and Ella helped me sort them into piles, turning the process into a game. This one has pictures of kids in the classroom, Ella pointed out, pushing a brochure for a local university's education program toward me. That means it's perfect for you, Mommy. Hudson State has an accelerated program for people who already have some credits. Andrew read carefully from another pamphlet. That's you, right? That's me, I confirmed, ruffling his hair. The doorbell rang and Ryan stood on the porch holding a small gift bag. Our friendship had deepened over the months since Monaco, careful and respectful, both of us aware of the precarious timing. I brought you something to celebrate Decision Day, he said, stepping inside. From the bag I pulled a beautiful leather-bound planner embossed with my name, my maiden name, Morrison. For your new schedule, he explained. I figured between classes, the kids, and everything else you might need this. It's perfect, I said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness and the lack of pressure behind it. Later, after the children were in bed, we sat on the back porch with cups of tea, discussing my final program selection. Hudson State's teaching certification pathway with a specialization in educational support for underprivileged communities. 2 years from now you'll be back in the classroom, Ryan observed. Terrifying and exhilarating all at once, I admitted. Starting over at 34 wasn't exactly the plan. Not starting over, he corrected gently. Continuing from where you left off. There's a difference. As the evening breeze carried the scent of my newly planted garden, I reflected on the journey of the past year, from the silent birthday that had shattered my world to this moment of quiet possibility. The path ahead wasn't perfectly clear or guaranteed, but it was authentically mine. I'd lost a husband but found myself, and somehow that felt like the better end of the bargain.